If I said the phrase attention seeking, what picture pops into your head? Now, if I say connection needing, what changes? If I said attachment seeking, would that feel different? Same person, different frame. And your frame can often determine your response. Hello and welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today is the most underrated skill in care, education, parenting, or managing anybody really. Intellectual humility. The ability to admit you might be wrong about what's going on. Okay, so let me explain myself. The first thing I'd like to say is most people understand that much communication is more around body language than anything else. But unfortunately, we pick up on a few bits of information and then, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, we consider ourselves to be experts. If I told you that somebody was smiling, what assumption might you make? Well, they must be happy. But have any of you who are watching this ever been smiling and definitely not felt happy inside? Sometimes we make assumptions about what we see on the outside. So let me tell you a story. I want you to imagine there's a dog, and this dog reacts really negatively to a bouncing ball. It reacts as if it's being attacked in some way, whether it cowers or it snaps. Well, that may seem ridiculous, right? It's just a ball. The ball can't hurt you, you silly dog. Until maybe you learned that somewhere in that dog's history, that motion, a bouncing ball, had been the antecedent, the before something bad had happened. Maybe a bouncing ball and the dog had chased it and the dog got hit by a car. So suddenly that ball represents something that's happened in the past. And this is the point. You don't always get to decide what something means to somebody else's nervous system. So when sometimes we perceive somebody as acting what we consider to be completely out of proportion, completely lack of perspective, it might actually be perfectly proportional to something in their past. So we're obviously exploring here elements of trauma-informed practice, but I want to take it a little bit deeper than that because I think trauma sometimes gets this overused in some ways. I want to just refer here about baggage. Every single one of us, nobody escapes this life without some baggage, without some bad experiences, without some pain, without some distress of some description. And it's amazing how little things that we may perceive as inconsequential can actually mean a massive thing to somebody else. I'll give you a wonderful example of this I thought was really, really quite inspiring. But it was a friend of mine who described the fact that she'd spent most of her life feeling ugly. And one of the reasons she said she felt ugly is because when she was young, she had quite a lot of freckles. But one day, one of her closest friends just came downstairs and the girl said, she was looking in the mirror, I hate my freckles. They're so ugly. That one comment immediately then felt huge to my friend. It felt like an attack on who she was. It felt that suddenly she was being labeled as ugly. Now, that may seem irrational, but to a child's brain, that's going to start to program, this must be who I am. This must be what I am. And it starts to program the emotional part of the brain. I want you to think of a situation where have you ever felt something mattered? You felt upset by it, frustrated, whatever it was, angry in the moment, but somebody else has belittled your feelings because they felt, look at the grand scheme of things. Does it really matter? But to you, in your world, it mattered. And that immediate kind of put down, belittling, invalidation felt horrible. Even if, yes, rationally, there's an element of you knowing, yes, I know I'm being ridiculous. Yes, I know that I'm being stupid. Yes, I know it's completely inappropriate. But the problem is the put down doesn't make you feel better. It actually creates a sense of shame. Okay. So the core skill that ideally we all need to develop is one of curiosity. And I know for any of you been listening to me for a while, you know I bang on about curiosity, fascination, interest all the time, because I think it is one of the most powerful tools that definitely I've ever developed in my life. I found it completely transformational that I've learned how to be more curious about others, but also more curious about myself. I'm curious about my own emotions, my own reactions, my own feelings, my own interpretations, my own baggage. And that's allowed me to better understand others, because if I find me confusing, well, I recognize that everybody else must also find themselves confusing too. But when we're starting to struggle, when we're in a state of stress, when we're finding something difficult and we want to go into control mode, caregivers often lose curiosity and replace it instead with things like labels. We label individuals as being lazy or a liar or manipulative or naughty or violent. And labels sometimes feel like explanations. They're almost a stereotype. They're a quick fix to kind of go, this is what category this person falls into. And we have to understand that as human beings, we are categorical learners. We also use it as a great way of explanation. How many of us have ever been to a restaurant, didn't have a good experience, but told everybody else, don't go there, it's crap? Now, what you really should have said is, on the evening that I went, the food and the service did not meet my expectations. But that's incredibly long-winded, so it's much easier to just label the whole restaurant and the whole experience as crap. I often refer to how often we hear a politician saying a lie and then we call them a liar. But I guarantee that politician has also told many truths, but we never call them a truther. And you can't be a truther and a liar at the same time. But labels so feel like explanations, but they're often just judgment in a fancy outfit, if you like. And they feed confirmation bias. Because if I labeled a person as lazy, well, suddenly I'm going to start noticing everything that reinforces that idea about them. How lazy they were, how they didn't get up, how they didn't do that, how they didn't do that particular job. Your brain is no longer programmed to notice the times that they work hard, that they do things, that they make an effort, because that's not what you're looking for. That's not the label. And it's exactly the same, that if you know somebody is a liar, you don't notice the times they tell the truth. And the truths may be small. So if you've got somebody who lies habitually about things that don't seem to lie, but sometimes you ask them a basic question going, hey, have you seen where the pen was? And they tell you the truth of where it was. You don't notice that because you're too busy noticing the label. And that's one of the problems. Because as soon as we start to notice a label, that's where we can create disconnection from an individual, because they start to then represent maybe a value that we don't like. If we don't agree with dishonesty, when we label them a liar, they become somebody we perceive as negative and bad, rather than, hey, we've all told lies at some point in our lives. And sometimes we thought it was the right thing to do in the moment. In fact, I would say that every time we've lied, we thought it was the right thing to do in that moment. Okay, so what can we do instead? I want you to think of questions that you can ask. And the big one is, why this? Why now? With any behavior, don't assume any label to a particular behavior. If, let's say, you went to a restaurant, let's follow that same example through, and you didn't have a good experience, rather than going, it's crap, we might go, I wonder what might have gone on there. Maybe it's a different chef. Maybe the chef isn't very good. Maybe the chef's having a bad day. Maybe the delivery got late. Maybe they've been stressed. Maybe they're struggling financially and therefore they're not buying the highest quality of products. Why is the service crap? Have they been trained? Have they been taught? Has something bad happened? Is this particular waiter or waitress got something really bad going on in their life? Now, it doesn't make the behavior okay, but actually because we can still have boundaries and still not leave a tip if we didn't enjoy it. But suddenly maybe a case of, well, that isn't any longer fixed. All of those things are changeable and movable. It could be different tomorrow. And that reduces the chance of our labeling. So the why this, why now is a great question to ask, and think about that all the time and make it a habit in what you do as far as curiosity is concerned. And sometimes we also need to think, is this something we need to fix or something we need to manage safely while we build skills? So when we're dealing with other people's behaviors, or we're finding it, whether, let's say it's lying or what we might perceive as laziness or whatever, if we perceive, let's say that I made an assumption that people who don't go to the gym are lazy, and I label them as lazy. If you don't go to the gym, you're lazy. Well, suddenly I need to be deciding, is that something I need to fix? Or is that something that I just need to manage? Okay, well, they don't go to the gym, but they do other things. I'm looking for other options. But if we immediately go in that they're a person need fixing, we're positioning ourselves that we're right and they're wrong. Now, you can believe what you like, and I'm not telling you what you shouldn't believe. But not many of us can necessarily claim that we've got the universal truth of the objective truth of what is right and what is wrong. The other thing I want to think about is communication. We've spoken before, communication is not just words. In tense moments, your tone, body language, and pacing often matter far more than your words do. And people don't just respond to what you say, they respond to what you signal. And that's why being calm isn't just advice. It is the most practical intervention. If we want somebody else to be calm, how can we go in and tell them to be calm if we're not calm ourselves? How can we help a person to know that they are safe, that we're not a risk, if we're in a state of agitation and distress? Because our whole body, our whole persona, our whole tone is communicating potential danger. And this is a problem with those assumptions. That if we're going in with assumptions about the person based on the behavior, whether we're labeling them as a liar, lazy, naughty, violent, dangerous, nasty, a nasty piece of work, for instance, do you think that's already going to come out in the non-verbal communication as we're walking into the room? We've already decided whether they're good and bad. We've already decided whether they're right or wrong. We've already decided whether they're motivated or unmotivated. We've already decided whether they're a threat or not a threat. So a powerful de-escalation principle is alignment. Find the yes point. Show you're on their side. Even if you can't give them what they want. The difference between no because I said so and I get why you're upset, I'm here and here's what we need to do next, or here's what we could do next. That's a much better bridge demonstrating collaboration and connection. And I know I've mentioned it many times and many of you out there know, but connection before correction. But the bridge between boundaries and dignity is that ability to collaborate, to recognize that I may not agree with the way they're feeling, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means that I shouldn't be labeling them as any particular person or habit or anything purely based on this particular moment in time. And I need to think about the way that I communicate as I go in, and I need to be working towards alignment with them, stepping to the side of them, allow them to see that we're looking at this together, and then see if we can figure a solution. That doesn't mean I have to accept inappropriate behavior. I can set boundaries as far as that's concerned, but then shouldn't we figure out the right way of getting about this together rather than just telling them how they should? Sometimes making changes in life can feel difficult unless you've got somebody to walk alongside you, maybe to show you how you could do it differently and it's safe to do it that way. One thing I want you to take, or there's a couple of things I want you to take away from this episode, because there's a few bits I mentioned in there that I think are really important. One is labels create lazy thinking. And that's not me labeling you, but it's lazy thinking. They're an automatic thing. I get it. And they save us time. If I try a curry and I don't like it and I go, I don't like curries, I'm not necessarily correct, but it might save me wasting a lot of money on a food that I don't enjoy. However, that doesn't mean that I'll never like any curry from anywhere cooked by any chef ever. And that's exactly the same thing with any label. We have to recognize they're not fact. They're just a shortcut. And curiosity creates better connection. Curiosity creates better care. And we do need to be curious gently. We need to be curious internally. We don't always need to go, why did you do that? And force them to justify why they feel the way they do. But letting them know that we would love to understand them better. Letting kind of holding in our brain how we need to kind of better understand. It can be so helpful to help us regulate those difficult situations. Now, if you're looking for like a full system that turns curiosity into consistent practice, proactive planning, early escalation recognition, safer responses, and learning after incidences, that's what we teach in my course, the ABLE Target System. And also in my book, Targeting the Positive with Behaviour the Challenge. And we've got a new book coming out in April called The Adaptive Caregiver. And the Adaptive Caregiver model is all about helping us to recognize where we need to be to allow the person who we're supporting, aimed around those living with dementia, but who we need to be to allow them to have their best quality of life and improve their well-being. And a big part of that is not correcting where they think they should be, not judging based on their behavior, but being curious about why this, why now, and who do we need to be to align with you to help you to promote your positive outcomes. Thanks. Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behavior that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behavior can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later, wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature, and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict, and respond and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again. My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.